Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Monday, September 29th, 2025, and today we're talking about if we should heat our tunnels, like financially and environmentally. Does it make sense? Cover crops that you would plant for mulch next summer and which cover crops work for that. So let's do it. All right, happy Monday, family. I hope you all have lovely weekends. It was just hot here. There's just something about the fall sun that is so brutal. The sunlight just feels hotter than any other time of the year. I don't know if there's any science to that, but it definitely feels that way. I just wanted to tell it that summer is over and to just let it go. Just move on. But anyway, loads of soccer and hanging out with family this weekend. It was Hannah's birthday, so that was fun. We went to the Racing Louisville game, and they got her a dub for her birthday, which I thought was very kind of them. It was also yet another weekend in adults acting absurd over children's sports, but that could be a whole daily show on its own, so I will spare you the details there. Don't forget that we will be going live on Wednesday again for our monthly live show celebrating 1 year of this wild endeavor that we call Growers Daily. So that will be at 9 a.m. Eastern on Wednesday, and it should be fun as usual. I always enjoy those sort of rapid fire question days. So come and bring your questions. We'll have a party, 9 a.m. party, but party nonetheless. All right, so it is about that time that we all start to turn our attention to cover crops as mulches, because although we've been talking about winter-killed cover crops, and they do sort of mulch the surface over the winter, they do not provide any sort of long-term weed suppression by the time spring arrives. Winter hardy cover crops, though, that's a different story. Though sometimes they could use some supplemental mulch if the beds are prepared well and the weeds are under control. They can be a pretty good weed suppressive mulch. So in this first segment, I'm going to talk about the planning aspect of this for real. There is nothing people mess up more than not having a termination plan for their cover crops. And in the third segment, we'll talk about the different cover crop options you have. All right, so before you plant a winter hardy cover crop, meaning one that will survive the winter, you need a plan for that cover crop. Specifically, you need to know, one, that you do not need that bed until the late spring or early summer, and two, how you are going to terminate that cover crop. So on the planning side, I've said this before, but I get more messages from people in the early spring asking me how to get rid of a cover crop because they want to plant something else in March than almost any other message I get. So just so it's clear, wherever you plant a winter hardy cover crop now in the fall will be sod in March and April, depending on where you are. In other words, you're planting a really dense stand of weeds. So keep that in mind if you need those beds early. If you want to not have to till it in and you want to use it as a mulch of sorts, you will absolutely have to allow for more time than getting into it in the early spring. In Kentucky, Zone 6B, our winter hardy cover crops are typically ready to terminate in roughly mid-May. So the earliest we can plant a cash crop into those beds is usually like late May or early June. Therefore, before we plant a cover crop that will survive the winter, we need to know what the plan is for that space in the spring. Like if you plan to plant early spring radishes and lettuces there, a winter hardy cover crop will not make sense. It will just make trouble. They do that. Or you will just have to expect to mow it and till it in, and then wait a few weeks for it to decompose before you plant anything. Now, for no-till termination of cover crops on a small scale, you have a few options. We're going to assume here that there's a grain involved of either rye or winter wheat or something like that, because those are the ones that make the best mulches. I have done whole videos on this subject, I think several at this point, and mini segments on it as well, and we'll link some of those in the show notes, but you will just need a plan. Do you have a tarp you can use? That gives you more flexibility in terms of killing it, where it does not have to be the cover crop all the way at milk stage before you smash it down if you have a tarp, if you can occultate it. Or if you don't have a tarp and don't plan to use one, can you crimp it adequately, like really smash it down to the ground? What will you use to do that? And then can you throw a little extra mulch over top to help weight it down and help, kind of finish off the killing, which doesn't sound very nice at all, but that is kind of what we're doing. All those little details have to be considered now before you plant the cover crop. If your crop plan is not finished, then it may in fact not be a good idea to plant that winter hardy cover crop. Instead, maybe a mulch or just some spinach or lettuce may be a better option to hold that area in place this winter instead of putting something there that you're going to have to deal with in the spring. And then this winter, try and plan for a winter cover crop for next year. Anyway, that's a good start. And then in the third segment, we will return to this idea of winter hardy cover crops and actually talk about which crops we're talking. But first, a little intermezzo of greenhouse heating. Sounds good. BRB.
Hey, Farmer Jesse. This is Emily from Prairie's Edge Garden, and we just got married on our farm this weekend. So right down here is our flower patch we call Queen's Landing. The background is Old World, where the garden began, and that far field is Jurassic Park, which is too much for 2 people to manage. But it was damn beautiful. Thanks for everything you do.
Today's episode of the Growers Daily is brought to you by Farmhand. Farmhand is the virtual assistant built for farmers, helping CSAs scale sales, run error-free fulfillment, and deliver 5-star service. Whether you're at 100 members or 1,000, Farmhand helps you grow without burning out. You've heard us and our farmers right here on Growers Daily. Explore farmer wins and learn more at farmhand.partners/no-till. That's farmhand.partners/no-till. All right, back to the show. If you, the listener or viewer, are enjoying this podcast, getting even a small amount of value from it, consider supporting our work over at patreon.com/no-till-growers. I will try to get to questions from everywhere that questions come in, but I will always get to your Patreon questions. Now, today's Patreon question comes to us from Patreon member Martin Kamaru, who writes, quote, "Hi, Jesse. I don't know about the States, but here in Denmark, orangeries," I'm assuming that's how you say it, that's French, but maybe they say it differently in Denmark, /heated greenhouses are semi-popular as a way to both season extend and to grow fruits that otherwise wouldn't survive the winters over here. As part of my long-term plan for my almost 1-acre site, I was thinking of building one. I've seen some people do it for very cheap by using used greenhouse windows. People often give away their entire greenhouse if 1 or 2 windows break during a storm. Do you have any experience with this? I know the value varies from person to person, but do you think the extra hassle of heating the greenhouse could theoretically be worth it compared to a passive one? End quote. All right, thanks, Martin. I love this question. So I'll answer the second part of your question first, which is largely, should I heat my tunnel? Like, does it make sense economically and or just in general? Well, some of that, actually, no, really all of it, will depend on what you're producing and what you're doing with that produce, but also how you're planning to heat it. If you've got a nice solar option or something that doesn't require much, if any, outside electricity or fuel, then I see no reason necessarily not to heat the tunnel in that situation. If you're relying on outside fuel like natural gas or electricity, especially there in Europe, then it's much more of a math problem as much as an environmental one. On the environmental side, is the production of the energy you need worth having out of season or out of context fruits and or vegetables? Probably not. And moreover, it would be hard to sell the fruit at a price that would both recoup the expenses and provide any sort of profit, and the space would have to be maximized to the greatest extent. Like, I have a friend who grew Meyer lemons here in Kentucky over the winter, and they had to sell each one for $12, just to even cover their costs. So it's a little tough. So effectively, it's kind of just using energy just because it's possible, and it doesn't always make sense economically. Of course, if you're using it for like high tunnel tomatoes or something that you could make relatively profitable, and you could get into production a month or so earlier than other growers, and you could do that using a small amount of heat, or you're growing well into the winter with greens and such, keeping the tunnel just above freezing, a la Elliott Coleman in the Winter Growers Handbook. Those are situations where I think you could probably math it out a little better. Or if you're using that space exclusively, or at least partly, for plant starts, like in the spring, and just keeping it low, keeping the temperatures low and not necessarily hot, then it could financially work out. You would just have to literally, even though it feels like the right word here would be figuratively, because, figures, add up your costs and the potential revenue and see where you land on that. Now, having a high tunnel already extends your season in both directions by at least a month without any sort of heating. And there are also passive options that could reduce the reliance or maybe even need altogether for outside heating, such as climate batteries and the like, which we've done segments about, and I'll link those in the show notes, or at least one of them. The soil is a massive heat trap, the thermal mass, and some people even put water barrels for additional thermal mass on the north side of a tunnel to help trap the heat as well. There are options that are more passive, lower energy, but can even add a week or two in either direction, if not more, to each season. So that's where I guess that's where I would start. As for reusing the old glass, that's a little tougher. You'd have to build a structure that would exactly hold those old panes, which itself would probably create new panes. Let's see what I did there. We've built cold frames out of old windows, and that works pretty well. As long as you're thinking about things like what paint they used to use. You don't want old painted windows that might drop paint chips into your lettuce and that sort of thing. So that's something to think about with the cold frames. But taking down any old tunnel and trying to rebuild it can be quite challenging because the holes and all the pieces were fit together to fit that specific property and slope exactly as it was constructed. So moving it into your own property and trying to retrofit it can be a little bit of a battle unless you're taking it from a perfectly flat slab and putting it back onto a perfectly flat slab. And even in that case, it could be tough. So expect to have to drill, all new holes in many cases, though I'm not sure about glass structures. That's probably a little bit more complicated. They are a whole other level of complication from the way you have to clean the windows to replacing them, obviously. Otherwise, people wouldn't be trashing them after the few of the panes break. Now, if the whole structure of that is sound and you can get it for fairly cheap and you enjoy a good project, I'm not going to say it won't work. And certainly people have done it and do it. And of course, I endorse, reduce, reuse, and recycle, all for that. But just examine it and make sure you feel confident that rebuilding the structure is a task that you are up for. Anyway, I hope there was something helpful in there. Otherwise, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we will talk winter hardy cover crops and mulches, like specifically which ones. BRB.
Farmer Claire Coleman here from the Winter Growers Podcast. Did you know that I also founded Real Farmer Care, a nonprofit that supports farmer well-being? From my own experiences farming, I knew firsthand that this type of support was missing from ag, so I decided to do something about it. As of today, there are over 500 farmer recipients of a $100 self-care award, with more applying daily. If you'd like to help, each $100 donated supports one new farmer. Visit realfarmercare.com to donate and learn more. Again, that's realfarmercare.com.
All right, so let's talk some cover crop options, sometimes referred to as croptions by dads. That's a fun fact. Much of this will depend on where you are located. For instance, if you are in the frigid north, the winter hardy stuff may not be as winter hardy as it is down here. And moreover, it may not even be ready to terminate until much later in the summer, taking that option off the table for summer production, though maybe it would be perfect for fall crops. For us here in Zone 6B, we use a lot of cereal rye, not to be confused with perennial rye. You don't want to think that one is an easy grass to get rid of. And we do that along with at least one, if not two, legumes. Vetch is our go-to legume. Crimson clover is often a really good option in our area. If I'm planting the winter hardy stuff really late, like after November, I like to add Lacy Phacelia to the mix. It is not a winter hardy cover crop unless it started really late in the season and stays really small. The example of when that scenario comes into play is sometimes things like fall carrots. Like I'm often harvesting those fall carrots like well into November or even December out of the field. So once those come out in the later fall, then I can plant something like Lacy Phacelia because it'll survive if it stays really small, even after it germinates. And I can add that to the mix with those legumes and some of those grains just to get that nice mulch. Ditto cilantro, it's another good one you can add in your late winter cover crop. You can also add daikons to the winter hardy mixes, though they are less about the mulch than retaining the nutrients and a little bit of decompaction. They won't survive the winter, but they will, those daikons really hold the nitrogen well. Now, I don't plant it with winter killed cover crops so much just because it's mushy in the early spring. I'd rather let it be mush underneath the winter hardy stuff so the beds are ready to plant by the late spring or early summer. Kales and mustards can also go in there for some like winter hardy additions, but again, they're not as good as mulches, right? Like they're much more tender. Grains are always the best mulches, but that support staff of the legumes and maybe some of those brassicas will help fill in some of the holes and add to the nutritional element. If you are going to mix, I prefer to not buy pre-made mixes, but to mix them myself because the seeds are all different shapes and sizes and need to be sown at different rates. So if you put crimson clover and rye in the same seeder, the crimson clover is really small seed, so it's going to be put down much heavier than the rye and will just not be helpful. It could be really inconsistent. Instead, I prefer to sow the clover by hand and then run over it with the seeder with the rye in the seeder to punch both crops in at the same time. Does that make sense? So you basically broadcast your crimson clover and then you run over that with your cedar so that the cedar punches the rye in at the same time that it's punching the crimson clover in. The one exception with the mix rule is vetch and rye. I'm fine with that pre-mix. Generally, I just get that from Johnny's and it works out pretty well, but otherwise I don't buy any pre-mixes. An example of one of the reasons I do this too is that like something like oats and peas are often mixed together and they'll sell those in a mix, but oats, if sown too late, don't winter kill for us. I prefer to have those separate. If I'm going to use oats, I'm going to either use it over the winter as a winter hardy cover crop, or I'm going to plant it really early as a winter killed cover crop because it's got to get pretty tall before it will die. Oats as a winter hardy cover crop, you ask? Well, it's much like Lacy Phacelia. If you get it in late enough, then it won't winter kill. It'll just stay really small and then grow in the spring. In fact, peas are similar in that way. If planted too late, even the ones that generally winter kill, they will survive the winter as well. So don't plant a winter killed cover crop in December thinking it will be gone by March. It probably won't be. It'll probably just be itself. Again, that's why I planted our winter killed peas already a couple weeks before I want to plant our garlic, which maybe by the end of this week we'll get in. The peas need to go in early enough so that we'll actually grow enough biomass to actually die when it starts to freeze. And then it will sort of lay down a little bit of mulch and effectively winter kill, which my autocorrect always really wants to change to kill the winter, which makes me laugh. Anyway, more links in the show notes if you want more cover crop stuff. Otherwise, we're going to call it a Monday. But before we go, we're going to get a quick word from our friends at Rimmel Greenhouse Systems. Whether you're growing tomatoes for market, flowers in the spring, or vegetables for your family, growing in a high tunnel protected from the weather provides the right environment for a harvest you can count on. Rimmel greenhouses are strong, durable, and easy to assemble, offering the quality you need to grow productively year-round. The team of experts at Rimmel Greenhouse Systems will be your trusted partners to ensure you get exceptional value from your greenhouse or high tunnel investment. Visit Rimmel.com today to get growing. Don't forget, No-Till Growers is now officially a nonprofit 501c3, so donations are tax deductible and greatly appreciated. If you need an end-of-the-year tax break, go look in our show notes. There's ways of doing that. Please make sure to like and subscribe and or follow wherever you're getting this podcast. That's an easy way to help us out as well. Enormous thank you to all of our show sponsors. And if you'd ever like to sponsor this show, you can reach out to Farmer Michelle at no-tillgrowers.com. Huge shouts to Willie Breeding for the theme music and Mike Hilbert for the production help and editing. Also, shouts to Epidemic Sound for the background music that you can hear. Is it disco? I'm kind of imagining disco. Pick up a hat or a copy of my book, The Living Soil Handbook, at no-tillgrowers.com to support our work. Big thank you to everyone over at patreon.com/no-tillgrowers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, or you bump up in the month of September, this is your last day to do that, you get a shout out on the show. So big shout outs today to Steve Broad. All right, so Steve is helping us kick off our story this week, which is going to be, I think it's going to be about an author, and his name is Dennis, and Dennis has been a writer ever since he can remember. He can still recall pecking away a story on his mother's typewriter, one about there was like one about a boy who raised a dragon from pond water, and another one about people that lived in a pond. But anyway, he was very pond-oriented in his youth. He had just been a writer his entire life and had never really gotten much attention for it, right? He loved doing it. Doesn't necessarily mean he was good at selling himself or selling his work. Sure, he'd published in a few literary magazines and even published a book with a small publisher, but mostly he worked, kind of dead-end jobs and lived cheaply so he could just spend his time writing. Then one day, a mysterious letter arrived in the mailbox looking for, quote-unquote, authors of fiction who would like to see their work come to life, or so the ad read. And, well, who doesn't dream of publishing a book that becomes, a movie or something? I mean, why else would I have written the Living Soil Handbook, clearly? And so he decides to go to the meeting, the time and place on the ad, and that is for tomorrow, provided we get some Patreon signups this evening for our official 1-year anniversary tomorrow, on Written in the Stars. See, it's really his titles that have kept him from the glory he seeks. It's just, I don't know, somebody needs to tell him that. Sorry, Dennis. Anyway, thanks for watching and or listening. We'll see you tomorrow. Bye.